The prairie stretched endless and bare beneath the sinking sun, the kind of evening where every shadow grew long and every sound carried further than it ought to. A rider moved slow through that fading light, his horse plodding steady, dust curling around its hooves. The rider's name was Elias Boone, and though he was only in his 30s, the years had carved deep lines into his face. He carried himself like a man who had lost more than he had ever won, and yet there was still a weight of quiet dignity in the set of his shoulders. Tucked in his saddlebag was a folded deed, ink still fresh, claiming him the new owner of a worn-out farmstead on the edge of nowhere. The farm revealed itself in fragments, broken fence posts leaning like drunks, a sagging barn roof blackened with age, and a house that looked more like a stubborn ghost than a home. Elias dismounted slow, brushing his hand against the porch rail that splintered beneath his touch. He had expected silence, the stillness of abandonment, but silence wasn't what greeted him. From inside, the floorboards shifted, heavy and deliberate, as though the house itself breathed. The door creaked open, and there they stood. 3 women, taller than he'd thought any woman could be, filled the doorway as though carved from the very timber that framed it. Their presence was staggering, sun-browned arms strong from work, dresses threadbare but held together with pride, eyes unflinching as they studied him like a trespasser. The eldest spoke first, her voice steady as iron. "You bought the land, but you didn't buy us." Elias felt the words sink into him deeper than the prairie wind ever could. He opened his mouth, then shut it, realizing no reply would shift their stance. His deed suddenly felt light as dust, his claim to the land a fragile thing in the face of these women who seemed part of it. There was Clara May, her gaze sharp as a hawk's, lips pressed tight as though every word was measured and costly. Beside her stood Temperance, broad-shouldered and solemn, a presence that carried something of the earth itself, practical and immovable. The youngest, Lavinia, held herself differently, bold, restless, as if daring him to challenge her fire. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and bread long cooled on the hearth. Elias set down his bag, but did not sit. The women watched him, their sighs filling the room, and he found himself shrinking inward, though he'd never been a small man. At supper that night, silence lingered thicker than the stew in their bowls. The youngest, Lavinia, broke it first, her voice sharp but trembling underneath. "You're going to have sex with us, whether you like it or not. That's what men do, ain't it?" The words, meant like a challenge, carried the ache of a wound too old to mend. Elias looked at her, then lowered his eyes, shame rising like heat through him. He did not speak, did not slam the table or meet fire with fire. He simply sat in silence, letting the weight of her bitterness pass over him. Somewhere in that silence, something unspoken shifted. 3 women waiting to see what kind of man he was, and Elias unwilling to become the one they feared. Days stretched thin. He fixed fences while the sisters worked the fields, and though words between them were scarce, a rhythm began to form. He saw Clara May split wood with a steady precision, each swing of her axe ringing with years of practice. He watched Temperance knead bread dough, her hands large and steady, folding life into the simple act of feeding. He caught Lavinia perched high on the barn roof, her legs dangling loose, her laughter echoing down as he patched shingles below. None of it was warm, not yet, but it was no longer hostile. They shared silence, shared labor, shared the ache of survival. Elias began to see their strength not as something monstrous, but as something striking, an inheritance carved by hardship, a beauty that carried the sting of loneliness. One night, he heard it, Lavinia's muffled crying from the barn. She whispered to the dark, words meant for no ears but her own, too much woman for any man to carry. Elias froze in the shadows. His instinct was to step forward, to tell her she was wrong, but he stayed hidden. Sometimes silence was the kindest act a man could give. It was the storm that broke the distance between them. It came sudden, black skies split with lightning, wind howling like it meant to strip the earth bare. The barn doors cracked open under the gale, livestock thrashing in terror. Elias threw himself into the chaos, ropes slipping through his raw hands as he tried to hold them. The storm's fury nearly took him, until 3 shadows loomed beside him, towering figures lit in flashes of white. Together they pulled beams back into place, tied knots with strength his arms could not match. Their bodies braced against the wind as if they'd done 100 times before. Elias, mud streaking his face, felt their power not as a threat, but as salvation. For the first time, they moved not as enemies, but as one. When at last the storm rolled past, and the rain slowed to a whisper, Elias collapsed into the mud. Over him stood the sisters, breath heavy, dresses torn and wet, their hair wild in the pale light of the moon. He looked up at them, voice hoarse and stripped bare. "This land is yours as much as mine." The words slipped out like confession, fragile but true. And in the silence that followed, something in the night changed. Trust not yet whole, but born like a seed in the dark earth, waiting for its chance to rise. The storm left the land rinsed and raw, every blade of grass bent low under the weight of rain. Morning rose quiet and pale, smoke curling from the chimney, as if the farm itself exhaled. Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow, though no word was spoken of the night before. Elias found an extra biscuit on his plate, Clara, May's doing though she pretended not to notice. Tempe showed him how to mend a plow harness, her hand steady, her tone almost gentle. Liv still threw her sharp little jabs, but her laughter carried less edge, as if testing whether his silence could bend into something kinder. Elias thought often of how change truly came, not through declarations shouted into the wind, nor through victories won with fists. No, it came slow, through bread passed across the table, through two hands gripping the same fence post, through the trust of shared sweat beneath a high, merciless sun. And though he did not say it aloud, he felt himself becoming less a stranger with every small gesture given and received. But the world beyond their land was not blind. In the town of Ash Hollow, where gossip traveled quicker than the river, whispers turned sharp. Men in the saloon snickered, saying Elias lived under the skirts of giants. Women spat the word cursed when the Boone sisters walked into the general store, muttering that they were unnatural, unwanted. One even hurled spit at the ground near Clara's boots, though Clara's eyes remained steady, unblinking, as if stone. The venom of the town cut Elias in ways he hadn't expected. Shame coiled in him, not for the sisters, but for his own silence. One night, Liv's fire finally burned too bright to contain. She cornered him outside the barn, her voice shaking with fury. "Why don't you ever speak for us? You let them call us monsters while you sit quiet." Elias looked away, his throat tight. "Because I ain't yet strong enough," he admitted, the words tasting bitter as ash. Liv's face twisted, somewhere between rage and sorrow. She stormed past him, but he saw her shoulders tremble. That trembling haunted him through the dark. And yet, the days carried on, laced with small mercies that words couldn't undo. He taught Clara to hold a revolver, steadying her hand with his, the weight of her trust heavier than the weapon itself. Tempe brushed mud from his shoulders after he slipped in the field, her hand lingering a heartbeat too long before she stepped back. Liv dared him to climb to the barn roof with her. He did, breathless beside her under a sprawl of stars. She laughed softer that night, not mocking but alive, her eyes searching his in the silver glow. The slow burn of it all was not the fire of passion, but the warmth of something deeper, longing stitched together by hesitation and quiet gestures, fear battling the fragile wish to belong. But peace does not last long in a place where men are ruled by cruelty. It was deep into one moonless night when they came, shadows moving across the field, the stink of whiskey heavy, torches flaring like hateful stars. A group of townsmen, jeering and unsteady, stopped at the edge of the Boone farm. "Freak women," they shouted. "Curse of Ash Hollow. Best burn it out now before it spreads." The sisters stood together, their height casting them into figures of myth in the torchlight. Fear flickered in their eyes, but was buried quick beneath steel. Elias, heart pounding, stepped forward. He stood in the glow of the fire, mud caked on his boots, his body trembling though he tried to keep it hidden. "This is my land," he said, voice breaking but louder than the night. "These are my people. If you want to drive them off, you'll go through me first." The words seemed to hang there, suspended between fire and silence. The mob faltered, the false courage of liquor dimming when met not with gunfire, but with unshaken resolve. Behind Elias, the Boone sisters stood tall, their shoulders squared, unashamed of who they were. Together, they formed something the town had never seen. Not curse, not monsters, but a force unmovable, rooted deeper than fear. One by one, torches lowered. Murmurs replaced threats, boots scuffed at the earth, and soon the men retreated into the night, muttering their poison into the dark rather than spilling it here. When the field was quiet again, only the smell of smoke lingered. Elias turned, his chest heaving, and met the gaze of the women who had once greeted him as a trespasser. Mud streaked his face, firelight flickered across his eyes. He had spoken, finally, not just for himself but for them. Liv's voice broke the silence, softer than he had ever heard it. Maybe you ain't like the others. Something loosened in the air between them, fragile but real. And though no touch or kiss sealed it, the moment was heavier than either could bear to name. Later, when the night lay still and the farm held its breath, Elias stood on the porch, staring out into the endless dark of the plains. He thought of storms and fire, of women carved larger than life, of how strength had been mistaken for shame. And he spoke to himself, but also to anyone who might someday remember his story. Out here, where the wind carries every secret, I learned that strength don't always come from the gun on your hip, nor pride in a name. Sometimes, it comes from standing beside those the world called too much, and finding you were never enough until you did. That's how love grows out of shame, how dignity rises from the dirt. And if you're lucky, maybe the land keeps your story too. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying his words into the horizon, where the night gave way to the faintest silver edge of dawn.